Hi, Aries. Okay, this is interesting. Before I even start pulling the cards, I keep getting the same feeling. Someone is realizing that you didn't disappear because you stopped caring. You stepped back because you finally chose yourself. And wow, I don't think they were prepared for that. They've been paying attention to your energy lately, noticing that you're no longer chasing, explaining, or trying to fix what they left unfinished. Your focus feels different now, stronger, calmer, more grounded. And the truth is, Aries, that change is making a much bigger impact on them than you realize. So let's take a look at these cards and see where this story wants to go. Okay, the moment I pulled these cards, I felt something very specific. This doesn't feel like someone who stopped caring. This feels like someone who assumed they would always have more time. And there's a difference. Because the energy around you right now, Aries, feels very different from what this person remembers. The first card that catches my attention is the Emperor. And wow, the way this card is showing up feels powerful. Not loud, not aggressive, just solid. It's almost like you've stopped trying to convince anyone of your worth. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've stopped chasing answers that never seem to arrive. You know, I keep feeling like this person became so accustomed to your presence that they never imagined what it would feel like when your energy started moving somewhere else. Not necessarily toward another person, just away from them. And that's what they're noticing now. Because while they're looking in your direction, trying to understand what's changed, you're focused on something entirely different. Your life, your goals, your future, the things that actually matter to you. The Queen of Wands is sitting here beside the Emperor, and honestly, Aries, this combination feels magnetic. There's something about you that feels brighter now, more confident, more comfortable in your own skin. Not because everything is perfect, not because you've healed every wound, but because you've stopped waiting for someone else to decide your value. And I think that realization is hitting this person harder than they expected. Because for a long time, they may have believed that if they needed your attention, they could find it. If they wanted reassurance, you'd give it. If they pulled away, you'd eventually close the distance. But that's not the energy I'm seeing anymore. The person I'm looking at through these cards is standing firmly in their own life. They're choosing themselves, and that changes everything. The Four of Swords feels important here, because I don't think this transformation happened overnight. I think there was a period of silence, a period where you had to sit with disappointment, where you had to process things nobody else could really understand. Maybe there were moments when you wanted answers, moments when you wanted clarity, moments when you wondered if this connection would ever make sense. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You stopped making your healing dependent on someone else's actions. You stopped waiting for someone else to choose you. And that quiet decision became the beginning of a much bigger change. The interesting thing is that while you've been focused on yourself, this person has been paying attention from a distance. The Page of Swords keeps pulling my attention, and every time I look at this card, I get the same feeling. Observation, curiosity, questions. This person seems to be watching the way you've changed, watching how you carry yourself, watching how you respond differently than before. And the more they watch, the more confused they become. Because the version of Aries they expected isn't the version standing in front of them anymore. You know what feels fascinating? I don't think they're seeing a colder version of you. I think they're seeing a stronger version of you. There's a difference, because strength doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes strength looks like letting go. Sometimes strength looks like accepting what you cannot control. Sometimes strength looks like moving forward even when part of your heart wishes things had unfolded differently. And that's exactly what they're noticing. They're noticing that your world no longer revolves around them. They're noticing that your happiness isn't waiting for their approval. They're noticing that the space they once took for granted no longer belongs to them automatically. And wow, that realization seems to be creating a lot of emotion beneath the surface. Because the more independent you become, the more they seem to recognize what your energy brought into their life. Not through dramatic conversations, not through arguments, not through explanations, just through your absence. Just through the contrast between what was and what is. And I keep feeling like they're reaching a point where they can no longer ignore that contrast. They're starting to ask themselves questions they weren't asking before. Questions about their choices. Questions about their assumptions. Questions about why your silence suddenly feels louder than any conversation the two of you ever had. And as I look at these cards, Aries, it feels like those questions are only beginning to grow. You know, the more I sit with these cards, the more I get the feeling that this person genuinely believed distance would solve everything. Almost like if enough time passed, these emotions would eventually quiet down. If enough space existed between the two of you, they could move on. They could stop thinking about you. They could stop feeling whatever this connection kept bringing to the surface. But that's not what happened. The Six of Cups keeps pulling me deeper into their energy. And honestly, Aries, it feels like memories have become impossible for them to ignore. Not the dramatic moments, not the painful conversations, the small moments, the ordinary moments. The way you laughed at something completely ridiculous. The way you looked at them when they were pretending everything was fine. The random conversations that somehow stayed in their mind long after they ended. It's almost like pieces of you keep showing up when they least expect it. A song, a place, a phrase somebody says, a familiar scent. Something simple suddenly becomes a reminder. And every reminder seems to lead back to the same question. Why can't I let this go? Because I don't think they expected your energy to stay with them like this. The moon is sitting here, and wow, this card feels emotional. Not emotional in a dramatic way. Emotional in the kind of way people experience when they're alone with their thoughts. When there's nobody around to distract them, nobody around to impress, nobody around to perform for, just themselves. And whatever feelings they've been trying not to look at. I keep seeing somebody replaying conversations in their head, thinking about things they wish they had said differently. Moments they dismissed, signals they overlooked, opportunities they assumed would always be there. It's interesting because I don't feel like they're only missing your presence. I think they're beginning to miss how they felt around you. There's a difference, because certain people enter our lives and leave memories. Other people leave an impact, and this connection feels more like an impact. Like something that quietly changed them without them realizing it at the time. The Nine of Swords feels heavy here. Not because I'm seeing catastrophe, more because I'm seeing somebody whose mind refuses to rest. Questions keep appearing. What if I misunderstood Aries? What if I walked away too quickly? What if I was so focused on protecting myself that I never stopped to understand what was actually in front of me? You know, I don't think these thoughts arrive all at once. I think they sneak in gradually. A little realization here, a little regret there, until one day they realize they've been thinking about the same person for far longer than they intended. And the strange part is that time doesn't seem to be reducing those feelings. If anything, it's forcing them to see them more clearly. The Five of Cups is sitting beside all of this energy, and the feeling I get is somebody looking backward with a different perspective than before. Because when something is happening in real time, people often justify their decisions. They explain things away. They convince themselves they made the right choice. They focus on what they think they're gaining. What I'm seeing here is somebody beginning to recognize what they lost, not because someone told them, not because Aries demanded recognition, because they're arriving at that understanding on their own. And that's a very different experience. There's a sadness connected to that realization, a quiet sadness, the kind people rarely talk about, the kind that appears when they understand that certain moments can't simply be relived whenever they choose, because while they've been sorting through these emotions, Aries hasn't been standing still. Life has continued moving, you've continued growing, and that awareness seems to make everything feel even more real. Okay, this is interesting. The more these memories surface, the less this person seems able to categorize you as just another chapter in their past. Something about this connection keeps refusing to stay where they left it. And I feel like that's exactly what they're struggling to understand right now. Something about that realization seems impossible for them to push away now. Because once a person begins questioning their own choices, it's very difficult to go back to the version of the story they used to tell themselves. The Judgment card is sitting right in front of me, and wow, this energy feels incredibly personal, not dramatic, not loud, just honest, painfully honest. It's like this person is standing face to face with memories they can no longer rewrite. For a long time, they may have convinced themselves that everything happened for a reason, that they did what they had to do, that creating distance was necessary, that pulling away was justified. But the more they sit with these thoughts, the more complicated those explanations seem to become. Because the question they're wrestling with now isn't whether they had reasons. The question is whether those reasons were worth what they lost. And that's a much harder question to answer. I keep feeling this energy of someone replaying specific moments. Moments where Aries offered understanding. Moments where Aries offered patience. Moments where Aries showed up even when they didn't have to. The strange thing is that these memories don't seem to be fading. They're becoming sharper, clearer, more difficult to ignore. Justice is showing up here. And there's something about this card that feels almost unavoidable, not in a karmic punishment kind of way, more in the sense that people eventually have to sit with the consequences of their own decisions. Whether those consequences are good or bad, whether they intended them or not. And this person seems to be arriving at a place where they can finally see the full picture. Because I don't think they viewed Aries fairly at the time. I think there were assumptions, fears, defenses, maybe even pride. Whatever was influencing them back then, it created a version of reality that feels very different from what they're seeing now. You know, one thing that keeps coming through strongly is that Aries was never asking for perfection. I don't think Aries was asking for impossible promises. I think Aries simply wanted honesty, consistency, presence, and somehow those things became harder for this person to give than they expected. The Eight of Swords feels extremely significant here. Because while they're looking back at everything that happened, they're also realizing something uncomfortable. Nobody forced these choices. Nobody made these decisions for them. Nobody created this distance except them. And wow, that's not an easy thing to admit, especially when a person has spent a long time believing circumstances were the problem. That other people were the problem. That timing was the problem. Because what I'm seeing here is somebody beginning to understand their own role in the story. Somebody realizing that certain doors didn't close on their own, they walked away from them. And once that understanding arrives, the emotional weight becomes much heavier. The Five of Cups appears again, and honestly, it feels different now than it did before. Before, I felt regret. Now I feel responsibility. There's a subtle difference. Regret says, I wish things had happened differently. Responsibility says, I understand how my actions helped create this outcome. And I think that's where this person is emotionally. They're looking at Aries through a completely different lens than they once did. Not because Aries changed who they were. Because the distance gave them enough perspective to finally see what had always been there. The support, the loyalty, the effort, the sincerity, the things they may have overlooked while focusing on everything else. Okay, this feels important. I don't get the sense that they're only mourning the relationship or connection itself. I think they're mourning the version of themselves that failed to fully appreciate it while they had access to it. And that's a very lonely feeling. Because no amount of reflection can undo a choice that's already been made. No amount of hindsight can return someone to a moment they didn't value enough at the time. The more they acknowledge that truth, the more the emotional walls seem to weaken. The defenses don't feel as convincing anymore. The excuses don't feel as strong anymore. What remains is a person trying to understand how they let something meaningful drift so far away from them. And honestly, the deeper they go into that question, the harder it becomes to pretend this connection was ever ordinary. The more they sit with everything they've been feeling, the more another realization seems to emerge. Not about what happened, not about who was right or wrong, something deeper than that. Something that reaches all the way into the way they've always viewed love itself. And wow, I wasn't expecting this energy to come through so strongly. The star is right here, and every time I look at it, I get this feeling that Aries entered their life for a reason they didn't fully understand at the time. Not because Aries arrived to save them. Not because Aries arrived to complete them. But because Aries challenged the way they understood connection. For a long time, I feel like this person believed love had conditions attached to it. Whether those conditions came from family, past relationships, disappointments, or simply the environment they grew up in, there was always this underlying belief that love required something in exchange. That somebody had to earn it, control it, protect themselves from it, manage it. And the more I look at these cards, the more I feel Aries quietly disrupted that entire system. You know, I don't think Aries was trying to teach them anything. I don't think Aries woke up one day and decided to change someone's worldview. I think Aries simply showed up as themselves, open, honest, direct. And somehow that became impossible for this person to ignore. The Hierophant is sitting beside the star, and there is something fascinating happening here. Because I keep hearing the phrase, maybe I had it backwards. Not in a dramatic way, just a gradual shift in perspective. A person beginning to question assumptions they once accepted as truth. Maybe vulnerability isn't weakness. Maybe consistency isn't boring. Maybe emotional availability isn't something to fear. Maybe being loved doesn't mean losing yourself. These thoughts feel new to them, unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable at times, yet they keep returning. The more they examine this connection, the harder it becomes to fit Aries into the categories they used before. Because Aries didn't love them through control. Aries didn't love them through pressure. Aries didn't love them through manipulation. What I'm seeing is someone slowly recognizing that what made this connection meaningful was the absence of those things. The King of Cups is here now, and wow, this card feels different from the emotional energy we've seen before. This doesn't feel like regret. This feels like understanding. It's almost as if they're beginning to see emotions as something they can listen to, instead of something they have to suppress. Because for a long time, I think they viewed feelings as obstacles, distractions, complications, things that interfered with logic, things that interfered with plans, things that interfered with control. Yet the farther they move into this reflection, the more they realize those feelings were trying to tell them something important all along. And the strange thing is that Aries never demanded they become somebody else. Aries never demanded perfection. The pressure they felt may have come from somewhere entirely different. The pressure to protect themselves, the pressure to avoid disappointment, the pressure to maintain a version of themselves that always appeared strong. The Queen of Cups is making this energy even more emotional, because now I'm seeing moments they once overlooked. Moments where Aries offered understanding without judgment. Moments where Aries listened instead of reacting. Moments where Aries seemed to understand things they never fully explained. And those memories feel different now. Back then, they may have viewed them as ordinary. Today, they feel rare, valuable, difficult to replace. Okay, this feels important. I don't think they're only reevaluating the connection. I think they're reevaluating themselves. The way they communicate, the way they trust, the way they love, the way they allow other people to get close. Because once somebody starts questioning those deeper patterns, the entire landscape begins to change. And honestly, Aries, that's exactly what I see happening here. Not a sudden transformation. Not some dramatic overnight revelation. Just a person slowly waking up to possibilities they couldn't see before. Possibilities that somehow seem connected to you every time they try to understand where this shift began. That shift in perspective seems to be bringing them to a crossroads they can no longer avoid. Because understanding your feelings and acting on them are two very different things. And wow, that's exactly where this energy feels stuck right now. The Two of Wands is sitting here, and the first thing I feel is hesitation. Not because they don't know what they want. Actually, I think they're becoming increasingly aware of what they want. The challenge is everything that comes after that realization. Because once you admit something matters to you, you also risk losing it. Once you acknowledge someone's importance, you become vulnerable to their response. And I keep getting the feeling that this person is standing in that exact space, looking toward Aries, thinking about Aries, imagining conversations that never happened, replaying words they wish they had said months ago, maybe even years ago for some of you. You know, there are moments when people become more honest with themselves than they are with anyone else. Those quiet moments where the truth finally slips through. And what I keep hearing from this person's energy is, I should have said something. Not once. Many times. There were opportunities, openings, moments when they could have expressed what they were feeling, moments when they could have been vulnerable, moments when they could have chosen connection instead of distance. Yet fear always seemed to arrive first. The Knight of Cups feels incredibly emotional here, because beneath all the reflection and analysis, there's a heart that wants to speak, a heart that wants to explain, a heart that wants Aries to understand that some of the silence wasn't indifference, some of the distance wasn't lack of feeling, some of the confusion wasn't lack of care. And honestly, I think that's one of the hardest things for them to sit with, because they realize Aries may not have been able to see what was never expressed. People aren't mind readers. Unspoken feelings don't automatically become understood. So now they're carrying all these thoughts, all these explanations, all these emotions they've kept locked away. And the weight of that silence seems heavier than it used to. Okay, this is interesting. The Eight of Wands is creating a sense of urgency around everything else I'm seeing. Not reckless urgency, not impulsive energy. More like someone realizing they can't keep postponing the same internal conversation forever. Because every time they tell themselves they'll think about it later, the feelings return. Every time they convince themselves they've moved on, another memory appears. Every time they try to focus elsewhere, something reminds them of what remains unresolved. It's almost like life keeps placing this connection back in front of them. And that can become exhausting when you're trying to avoid what your heart already knows. The Fool is here too. And wow, this card feels much more emotional than adventurous in this reading. Because what I see isn't somebody running towards certainty. I see somebody standing at the edge of uncertainty. Someone who understands that moving forward may require courage they haven't fully found yet, because there are risks involved. There is the possibility of rejection, the possibility that Aries has changed too much, the possibility that Aries no longer sees them the same way, the possibility that time has created a distance they don't know how to bridge. And honestly, those fears feel very real. I don't see somebody pretending otherwise. What I see is someone wrestling with the question of whether fear deserves the final word, whether fear should continue making decisions on their behalf, whether protecting themselves is still worth what it's costing them emotionally. You know, the deeper I go into this energy, the less this feels like a simple romantic dilemma. It feels like a personal battle. A battle between who they used to be and who they're slowly becoming. Because the version of this person from the past may have chosen avoidance, may have chosen silence, may have chosen safety. The version emerging now seems to be asking a different question. What if being honest is worth the risk? And I feel like that question is growing louder every day they carry these feelings without an answer. That question seems to be changing more than they expected. Because once someone stops focusing exclusively on what went wrong, they begin paying attention to what could still be possible. And honestly, Aries, that's where this energy feels very different now. The Seven of Pentacles is sitting here, and I keep getting the image of someone taking a long look at their life. Not just their relationships. Everything. The people they've invested in, the choices they've made, the future they're creating for themselves. And somewhere in that reflection, Aries continues to appear, not as a memory this time, not as unfinished business, more like part of a picture they're trying to understand. You know, I don't think they're only asking themselves whether they miss you anymore. That question feels too small now. The question feels more like, what kind of life do I actually want? And that's a very different place to arrive. Because when people start imagining the future, they naturally think about who belongs in it, who inspires them, who challenges them, who brings out parts of themselves they genuinely respect. And wow. The more I sit with these cards, the more I feel that Aries has become connected to those thoughts. Not because Aries is perfect, not because Aries never made mistakes, but because this person is beginning to recognize qualities they once overlooked. Consistency, strength, independence, authenticity, things that may not have seemed extraordinary before now carry a completely different weight. The Nine of Cups feels surprisingly emotional here, not in the way we've seen throughout the rest of this reading. This feels quieter, more mature, almost like somebody acknowledging what genuinely matters to them. Because for a long time, I think they chased things they believed would make them happy. Validation, attention, control, certainty, whatever it was. Yet the more they reflect, the more they realize happiness may not have looked the way they imagined it would. And that's creating another shift in perspective. I keep hearing this thought repeating in their energy. If I had understood then what I understand now, not because they're trying to live in regret, not because they're stuck in the past, because they're recognizing how much they've changed. The King of Pentacles appears, and this card feels incredibly grounded. What stands out to me isn't romance, it's stability, responsibility, growth, the ability to build something meaningful over time. And I think that's part of what they're beginning to associate with Aries. Not excitement for a moment, not temporary fulfillment, something deeper, something that could actually grow, something worth protecting, something worth showing up for consistently. Because one thing I keep noticing throughout this reading is that their definition of strength has changed. At one point, strength may have looked like emotional distance, control, self-protection, the ability to walk away first. Now, strength seems to look very different. It looks like accountability, honesty, vulnerability, the willingness to stay present even when things feel uncomfortable. And that shift feels directly connected to everything they've experienced through this connection. The star is appearing again, and wow, there's something beautiful about seeing this card here at the end of the spread, because it doesn't feel like wishful thinking. It feels like perspective. The kind of perspective people gain after they've spent a long time looking at the same situation from the wrong angle. I keep feeling this sense of possibility surrounding them. Not certainty, not guarantees, just possibility. The realization that the future doesn't have to look exactly like the past. The realization that people can grow, that priorities can change, that understanding can deepen, that fear doesn't always have to make the final decision. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this. They no longer seem to be looking at Aries through the lens of who you used to be. They're seeing who you've become. The person who kept moving forward. The person who continued building a life. The person who learned how to choose themselves. And strangely enough, the more they see that version of you, the more they seem inspired to become a better version of themselves too. And that's where we're going to leave the reading today. Wow. This was a powerful journey to move through together. Whether this message resonated with your situation or simply gave you something to reflect on, I hope it reminded you of how far you've come. Because one thing that stood out throughout this entire reading is that your growth didn't happen by accident. It came from choosing yourself, even during moments that weren't easy. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. If this reading connected with you, feel free to take what resonates and leave the rest. And remember, your story is still unfolding. Take good care of yourself, Aries. Sending you lots of love, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye for now.